Well, let's turn our attention to Ukraine, which of course is being used as the sponge really to soak up everybody's attention. Everything is about Ukraine, but things are clearly not going right. So let's have a look at the BBC. This is their sneering headline page on Ukraine, and of course they've made very big of the fact that the Russians have decided to send some musicians to entertain the troops. It's coming up to Christmas. This is a very normal thing for any military force to do, but for the BBC this is an opportunity for a further sneer at anything to do with Russia. But quite an interesting mix of articles, because it's clear that the agenda is beginning to stumble as things don't go right in Ukraine. And of course what's been happening again over the last few days is another great Russia missile attack on Ukrainian infrastructure, and the Ukrainians now freely admitting that over 50% of their electrical supply systems are down, and also water is now becoming a problem as Russia attacks the infrastructure. But let's remember, of course, that Russia is not alone in this tactic. It's been used many times, particularly by the US and UK and the NATO allies, be it in Iraq or in wars inside Europe itself, Serbia being one of them. And there's nothing special, but clearly these attacks are doing damage. But it's surprising because a little while ago we were being told by a great many people across Western media that Russia was running out of missiles. Let's have a look at this brief clip.
That the Russians are running out of missiles. What's your take?
Yes, I mean, that's been said for a little while, partly because they're using missiles improvised for other purposes. We've seen missiles slamming into buildings, which are sea-based missiles. They're anti-ship missiles carrying sort of an 8-ton warhead. An 8-ton missile with a half-a-ton warhead intended against aircraft carriers. We've seen surface-to-air missiles meant to be anti-aircraft missiles used against ground targets. And the Russians don't have that many, it seems, caliber Tomahawk, like cruise missiles, ship-launched cruise missiles, which they are using. They used a few yesterday. But if they had more, I'm sure they would use more. And the problem is that they seem to be running out of the components that they need for these things, because they've been under sanction for quite a long time.
Well, there we are. That was going back to October. I have to say, I think that particular gentleman from King's College, Mr. Clark, was talking utter nonsense, and of course now we can see the reality. Nothing he's talked about has come true. But perhaps we can bring Patrick Henningsen on screen. Patrick, what are your thoughts about that little clip?
It just echoes everything we see every time the think tanks, the mainstream media, the experts, the military experts. And to me, it's quite staggering. And in fact, it's a bit sad that you see ex-generals, ex-brigadier generals, lieutenant colonels, rear admirals in some cases, coming on and giving a depiction of the conflict in Ukraine that is so divorced from reality. And you can only draw one conclusion from that, and that's that they're being marinated in their own propaganda. They're not reading any Russian reports. They're not reading the German press or the Hungarian press or anything. They're just basically listening to UK and US media reportage. And if you do that, you're going to get a very distorted, if not completely nonsensical view of the conflict. So you're not going to have any sense of scale or who's doing well and who's not doing well. And so again, marinated in your own propaganda, bunkered up in your own echo chamber. And I might add that the losses on the Ukrainian side for hardware is absolutely staggering in the last couple of months. And to say that Russia doesn't have caliber missiles, Russia has not deployed even a small percentage of the missiles that they have, nor have they even really deployed their Air Force to run any sorties, not even to the level that they're using it in Syria. And that's a low intensity conflict compared to this Ukrainian conflict. And I might add, Brian, on your previous point, that Ukraine has attacked Russian infrastructure already, oil refineries in Belgorod, or the Kerch Strait Bridge, or other targets inside Russia. So that's effectively, the gloves are off at that point. And so Russia has always responded in kind, and always in response to those types of incidents or things similar to that. So they're sending the message to the Ukraine, to the US and NATO: if you're going to up the ante, then we're going to up the ante. So it's like for like, it's reciprocal.
Okay, Patrick, thank you very much for that. Well, let's have a look at the harsh reality of the ammunition situation, and it's not looking particularly good for the West. So we can just bring in a number of different articles here, all talking about the US, the Europe, the UK running out of weapons. We simply do not have any more weapons to be given to Ukraine, and this is because of the huge quantity of ammunition and weapon systems that Ukraine has used up. But this is the real lesson, that of course Ukraine is now desperately short of munitions. The Ukrainian officials are saying so on a fairly regular basis. They are running out, and the West is not in a position to re-equip them. So this war is only going to go in one direction from here on. Let's have a look at some of the other comments here. So we've got the Guardian, Russia-Ukraine war at a glance, what we know on day 299 of the invasion. Britain to announce major new artillery package for Ukraine. Ukraine says Russian shelling targeting Kherson as its forces continue to hold on to Bakhmut. Well, this is the meat of the article, which says that Rishi Sunak has promised hundreds of thousands of rounds of artillery ammunition next year under a 250 million contract that he claims will ensure a constant flow of critical artillery ammunition to Ukraine throughout 2023. This is a very interesting claim. It's too little, much too late, but of course we also know that the UK cannot provide its own military with enough ammunition, and so how they're going to supply Ukraine is going to be very interesting. But of course Ukraine wants more. So here we have Zelensky saying that he needs a reliable air defense shield to make Russian terror impossible. These were some of his comments. On Monday, there'll be a meeting of the leaders of the northern European countries, Great Britain, Finland, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Iceland, the Netherlands, Sweden and Norway. These are our extremely important friends, important partners and effective assistants in our defence. Therefore, we're preparing several new proposals from Ukraine on how to strengthen all of us, all of the countries of Europe. So Zelensky is absolutely alongside us. We can trust him to defend us, or maybe not. But he goes on. Let's have a look at the Freedom article here. Reliable air defense shields will make Russian missile terror impossible. This will mean security for millions of people, was what he had to say. And why has all this come up? Well, it's come up because, of course, the damage to the Ukrainian, particularly electrical supply systems, is now so great that effectively there's breakdown in the country. But this article, of course, is propaganda in itself. It begins by saying that the plan is to restore electricity to almost 6 million Ukrainians, as if this was a minor attack which has been brushed off. But if you read the second paragraph, you'll see there's city area after city area listed, and of course there is no power in those regions. So here we are, dear partners. Find an opportunity to give Ukraine reliable protection for our sky, a reliable air defense shield. You can do it. You can provide protection to our people, 100% protection from these terrorist Russian strikes. When this happens, the main form of Russia terror, missile terror, will become simply impossible. And this will mean safety for Ukrainians, safety for millions of people, and a strategic restructuring of the entire military situation. The fewer opportunities Russia has for terror, the more opportunities we will have to restore and ensure peace. Well, of course, this is complete nonsense, because Zelensky's still not realised that his allies cannot provide these systems. And even with Patriot, even the BBC now is getting particularly vague, because although here's the great missile system in the text, what does the BBC have to say? Precisely what overall effect Patriot systems will have is difficult to say. Well, the comment to that is really too right, because we believe that there are only going to be 2 systems supplied, and of course they're not able to defend the vast areas of Ukraine against those missile attacks. But meanwhile, the propaganda from Ukraine continues. So we've got freedom again here. Ukrainian defense forces do not target residential areas. Intelligence official on Donetsk shelling. This is the comments. But if we look at what's coming out on social media, and this is accurate reporting, this particular one is talking about attacks on stadiums in the Donbass arena in the last 2 hours. So that was virtually 24 hours ago now. And the poster had pointed out this was on the day of the final of the World Cup 2022. And if we have a look at people, journalists who've actually visited the area, this just happens to be Patrick Lancaster, but there are others, they're absolutely talking about Ukrainian attacks on civilian infrastructure. But what does the Ukrainian ministry say? We can assure you that the Ukrainian defense forces, of course, do not fire and do not target residential areas. Well, this is pure lies. And of course, this is the material that is pumped out on a daily basis by the BBC. If we go deeper, and UK Column over the last few days has been starting to do this, we can see a large number of organisations that have been working over many years to restructure Ukrainian politics and society. And we just continue this theme today with this little look at elections. Let's just watch this video clip.
Welcome, I'm Antonina Antosha and you are watching Head to Head with UATV. Ukrainian and international election observers have announced that the July 21st parliamentary election in Ukraine was held in a fair and competitive manner. According to the preliminary results, 5 political parties were elected to the 9th convocation of the Verkhovna Rada. In particular, Servant of the People Party, the opposition platform For Life, European Solidarity, Batkivshina and Holos. To talk more about the assessment of these elections, we are joined in the studio today by Dr. Olga Onuch. She is an associate professor in politics at the University of Manchester, an associate member of Nuffield College. Hello, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been watching the process of the parliamentary elections in Ukraine very closely. What are your impressions?
Well, I think most importantly, we need to stress this was a free and fair election, amongst one of the most free and fair that we've seen in Ukraine to date. So I think that's important. And this is a dramatic shift in parliamentary politics in Ukraine. We've never seen something like this. We've never seen a party get an outright majority in this way.
We'll talk about this later.
Yeah, so these are the most important things, I think, that things are changing. Things are changing dramatically. And some of the politicians may have not learned their lesson from the presidential elections, it seems. And they paid the price.
Could you dwell a little bit more on that?
Well, I mean, there was an obvious dramatic failure of many presidential campaigns a few months back, right? Losing with a 73% in the case of the former president, Petro Poroshenko. It's dramatic. And clearly the electorate was saying, we are unhappy with the way you run politics and what you propose to us in campaigns. You're not listening to us. And that was this. So a lot of us that observe politics in Ukraine, we were looking at this moment and trying to explain to the general public in the West, certainly, it wasn't necessarily about just Zelensky and how great he was, but it was also about how dissatisfied people were with what.
Mainly it was.
Right, exactly. And then it seems that no lessons were learned, right? The campaigns did not turn to the issues that the median voter in Ukraine cares about. The campaigns did not focus on bread and butter issues for the most part. They did not focus on the fact that in the last 5 years, many people have become poorer.
So an interesting little presentation by that lady, and I wonder whether our audience picked up on some of the points that I saw, because supposedly she's talking about the elections, but actually once she is given free rein, she is talking about the campaigns which actually changed the result of the elections. So who is this lady and why should we pay attention to people like her? Well, let's bring her on screen, Olga Onuch. And you can find details here on her website. She said she grew up in the art communities of Warsaw, Kiev and Toronto and New York. So in my book, she's an internationalist. But if we look in and look a little bit in a little bit more detail, she's happy to say that she spent much of her teens working with the Open Society Foundation's Soros Centres for Contemporary Art. And if you get deeper into her own words, and I encourage people to go and do this, you will start to see that what this lady actually is an activist. And I've put the comment there, is she a political commentator or is she actually a change agent? And I'm going to suggest that if she's writing books, the Zelensky effect, for example, what we've got is a deep state change agent. David, very quickly, because I'm watching the time closely today, these people are, one, extremely dangerous, but it's clear that they're embedded throughout Ukraine at the moment.
Throughout the Ukraine, throughout the entire Western world, because this lady's in a university in Manchester. We'll come to change agents in Scotland later in the programme. They're everywhere. And in fact, we've now got the Scottish Government openly telling Scottish businesses that they must become change agents themselves as they roll out the cultural Marxist agenda. So it is everywhere. They've had the long march through the institutions, and now everywhere you look, every stone you lift, there's a little bug running away, and it's more of this woke ideology, and it has a certain belief system, it's religious in its nature, and it's very, very toxic.
Yes. Well, of course, change agents come in many different shapes and sizes, but let's bring possibly another one on screen and have a look at what Archbishop of Canterbury Welby has been up to.
I think the other thing that struck me was seeing the site of the mass grave at Bucha, the photos of what had been done to the people there, the rape, the massacres, the torture by the occupying Russian forces, and hearing from those who are studying the ideology which is driving these attacks, that it is an ideology of conquest, and it wants Ukraine less worried about the people, but very worried about getting historic Ukraine back, and realizing how important it is that we support the Ukrainian effort, because essentially they are, if they go, it's not going to stop from their ideology.
So David, in my book, he wants to send more weapons and munitions to Ukraine. He's certainly not talking about providing medical supplies. He doesn't mention the word peace at all. But earlier in that clip, and encourage people to watch it, in my book, he is mocking the crucifixion. But should we trust this man, do you think?
Well, he's not engaging in critical thinking, right? I mean, the Bucha massacre is kind of the Ukraine crisis, the Ukraine war in microcosm. Who did it? Now, he's repeating and completely uncritically accepting the Western and Ukrainian narrative. It was the Russians. The information that we've seen, the timing, the nature of the bodies, the condition of the bodies, all suggest that this happened after the Russians left. Partly the fact that all the bodies were carrying bags that were handed out by the Russians, and they were therefore could be seen as people who were collaborating with the Russians. Why would the Russians kill them? It was a very, very odd situation. At the very least, there is uncertainty as to who carried out this atrocity. There is a very good case to say, well, it was the Ukrainians. Now, if it was the Ukrainians, that presumably completely reverses everything he just said, and the policy he's advocating for the entire Western world as well. So you think he would be careful to get it right. You think he would be more responsible. But no, he just accepts the talking point and on he goes.
And on he goes. Well, let's just remind the audience of the sorts of friends that Justin Welby keeps. And this was a picture from the Ecumenical News a little while ago. This was 2015. and there he is mixing it with the internationalist bankers. So I think this man's agenda has got to be looked at very carefully.